His fingers moved without permission. They had already memorized every curve, every hollow from countless nights before. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight I welcomed it. Not from love that hadn't bloomed yet, but because something deep within me had finally stopped fighting back. Perhaps it was how he spoke my name like a forbidden word he'd never meant to voice. Or maybe it was how my flesh responded before my thoughts could protest. That evening, he returned to me repeatedly, like someone attempting to rewrite the past through touch and whispered breaths. I allowed it, not from obligation, but because I craved understanding what it felt like to be selected, even without being consulted. If you've stayed with me through this tale, if something inside you has been stirred, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. There's so much more coming your way. They claim every moment of silence carries its own form. That evening, quiet poured into the sedan's back seat like liquid mercury frigid, dense, coating my skin. I never questioned our destination. My father wouldn't have provided answers anyway. He simply gazed through the glass, radiating the particular stillness that comes from excessive bourbon and mounting debts. His wordlessness wasn't remorse. It was hollow emptiness. The peaks grew more imposing as we traveled deeper. Forest branches bent inward like curious observers. The heavens shifted from gray stone to charcoal, then dissolved into nothingness. When our vehicle finally halted, my feet met shifting pebbles that seemed to whisper warnings. The mansion towered. Before us, neither welcoming nor cozy, just enormous, constructed from stone and crystal. A dwelling built to outlast human emotion. Cashin didn't emerge to welcome us. No greeting awaited. Instead, a gentleman in charcoal clothing, likely an attorney, guided us through the entrance. The corridor carried scents of cedar timber and aged documents. I moved past looking glasses that seemed to reject warmth entirely. My reflection appeared ghostly, unfamiliar, like someone partially dissolved. They escorted us to a chamber that resembled a vault. One table, two seats, paperwork, and a writing instrument. My father accepted it immediately, inscribed his signature where instructed, and departed without backward glances. No farewell, not even my name spoken aloud. Cashin signed finally. No conversation, no acknowledgement of my presence. Simply a hand with elongated fingers and pale knuckles, dragging the pen as though it held no significance. Yet I held meaning, at least on paper. A commodity, legal tender, one signature away from vanishing entirely. The housekeeper escorted me to my quarters. "This belongs to you," she stated, then hesitated uncertainly, temporarily. No windows existed, only a solitary lamp casting elongated shadows across stone barriers, a fireplace cold for years. A bed too massive, too chilled, with pristine linens pulled so severely it resembled a burial chamber. I perched on its edge. My hands remained motionless in my lap, yet internally everything quaked. Nobody had explained tonight's expectations, but I wasn't naive. At 22, I understood reality, though affection remained foreign. I measured minutes like counting stitches. The chamber didn't produce echoes, but silence carried physical weight. I kept remembering my mother's final words before death claimed her. Never confuse quietness with tranquility. The door parted sometime after midnight. "No knocking," preceded his entry. Cashin entered as though he already owned the space, the moment, my destiny. Words never passed his lips, yet every gesture carried intention, stripped of pretense and hesitation both. He sealed the door with finality that twisted my stomach. My skin sensed what approached before my mind could process it. He paused before me. I couldn't lift my eyes, but felt his gaze sharp as winter's bite. Examining the pieces of me still clinging to dignity, his touch found my shoulder barely contact, yet I recoiled. No apology came, no request for permission. His hand moved to the ribbon at my spine, unfastened it, then waited. My breathing hitched. I despised how my body reacted, not with desire, but capitulation. A conditioned response from a lifetime spent avoiding pain. The gown dropped. So did my resistance. Pain didn't come as expected. Gentleness didn't either. He wasn't creating love. Eye contact never happened. Something else occurred, quieter than brutality, more frigid than passion, ownership. He claimed me once, then again, as though trying to forget something by carving it from my flesh. Tears didn't flow, not from strength, but because weeping required feeling, and emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford then. When it concluded, he lingered momentarily, breathing heavily. His chest rose and felt like someone fleeing memories. Then he stood, straightened his clothing, and departed still wordless. The door clicked shut. I remained there, uncertain of my own existence. My body wasn't damaged, but something internal had shifted, not shattered or bruised, just disconnected, like artwork hanging crooked for years until finally falling. Sleep evaded me. I waited not for his return, but for the part of myself that had departed to come back. It never did. Instead, I noticed the atmosphere, its heaviness. This wasn't safety. Cruelty wasn't present either. Something existed between extremes. Space between consent and refusal, between girlhood and womanhood, between servitude and marriage. Morning found me sitting upright, sheet clutched around my shoulders, staring at the closed door. I felt neither possessed nor liberated. What haunted me most wasn't his actions. It was that part of me was already listening, anticipating the sound of returning footsteps. His absence marked the following morning. No breakfast service, no staff, no casual conversation. The house seemed designed for spirits rather than people. Endless hallways without windows, doors that moved silently, furnishings too perfect to suggest actual living. A home curated for presence without inhabitants. My room remained unchanged. The bedding still retained warmth from our encounter. The air still carried his essence: cedarwood, leather, cold steel. I hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't even shed tears. No space existed for weeping in a body still deciding what had occurred. I was no longer untouched. Yet I wasn't certain I'd been touched either. By afternoon, hunger reminded me of my humanity. I wandered until discovering the kitchen clinical, steel-lined, arranged like a showroom display. I prepared toast that tasted of nothing. The butter refused to melt. He didn't appear. But evidence of him remained: a coat draped over a chair back, a half-empty glass on the counter, a leather-bound book on the windowsill, open midway through. I dared not read it. It felt intrusive, and I was already enough of that. That evening, I waited not from want, but from uncertainty about what would happen if I didn't. Fresh sheets had appeared. I never heard anyone enter. This unsettled me more than if the bed had remained stained and cold. I lay rigid as the mattress. My body remembered more than my mind permitted: the weight, the silence, his rhythm. How he hadn't spoken, how I hadn't stopped him. I had consented only through non-resistance. Was that equivalent? He returned past midnight. No announcement, no hesitation. This time he extinguished the lamp. Darkness made it worse. I couldn't prepare for him, couldn't read his expression, couldn't ready my breathing. He touched me like routine, like ritual, like something already expected. Neither rough nor gentle, just systematic, again and again. When it ended, he remained. Longer than the first night. He sat at the bed's edge, breathing slowly, back toward me. I watched his spine's outline beneath fabric, rigid, tense, beautiful in ways I didn't want to acknowledge. He didn't look at me, didn't ask about my well-being. He whispered so quietly, I merely imagined it. This is the only way I don't dream. Then he left. I woke late the next day. My body felt different, not ruined or broken, just altered, like stepping into an unauditioned role. I wore my only other dress, pale gray, long-sleeved, modest, forgettable, just as I wished to be. Walking the halls, I began noticing previously unseen details: a scratch on the banister, a burn mark near the fireplace, a picture frame turned backward on the study desk. Details, imperfections, proof of previous inhabitants, who no longer remained. The staff, what little I glimpsed, avoided me. Polite smiles, lowered gazes. They answered nothing, offered nothing. One woman placed tea on my knitstand while I bathed, vanishing before I emerged. I attempted asking her name once. She only bowed her head. This wasn't a home. It was a contract. The third night, I tried staying awake. I didn't want him catching me unaware again, but exhaustion won. When I woke, he was already there. This time, he didn't undress me. He touched my nightgown's hem, hesitated, then lifted it. Something gentler existed in how his fingers brushed my thigh. I hated noticing. Then I hated not hating it. Afterward, he stayed longer. He lay beside me, breathing, not touching. I could feel his heat, his presence's weight. But he didn't move, didn't speak. My throat was parched. I whispered, "Why are you doing this?" His response was barely audible. "Because you let me." I wanted to scream. Let him? I thought of papers. I'd never signed the marriage I never agreed to. The fact that he walked through that door nightly and I never stopped him. But the most terrifying part wasn't his actions. It was what I began feeling when the door didn't open. On the fifth night, he didn't come. Hours blended together. Silence pressed harder, and for the first time, I realized I was listening for his footsteps. He didn't come the sixth night either. The silence bloomed. Differently this time, not like emptiness, like longing. A low, thrumming need, not for the act itself, but for the strange stillness he brought when lying beside me. The kind of stillness that felt less like solitude. It's cruel what the body can crave before the heart catches up. Or maybe before the heart has time to flee. I lay in bed fully clothed, sleepless, watching the light sliver beneath the door fade and return as hallway lamps cycled. Each time it brightened, I held my breath. Each time it darkened, I felt air collapse in my lungs. I hated him and I missed him. Both could be true. The seventh night, I found his study door cracked open. I shouldn't have stopped, but the light was warm, golden instead of cold. And curiosity is a dangerous kind of hunger. I stepped inside. Books lined the walls, organized not by color or author, but by wearer. His most beloved were nearly breaking at the spine. A record played soft jazz, scratchy, old. A trumpet that sounded like grief with nowhere to go. Cashin sat at the desk, back turned. He didn't flinch when I entered, didn't look up, just said, "You shouldn't be here." I wanted to ask why, but something in his posture, the way his hands remained still, clasped like prayer or plea, kept me quiet. Instead, I looked around. My eyes found the painting over the fireplace. A woman, face half finished, colors blurred. Hair like mine. I swallowed. "Who is she?" He stood abruptly. I said, "You shouldn't be here." He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His voice could slice through glass. I turned and left. But I didn't forget how he clenched his jaw, not in anger, but restraint. That night, I waited again, wore the same dress, combed my hair, sat upright. In bed, like I might speak if he came, like I might say stop or stay. I didn't know which, but he didn't come. And I hated myself for the disappointment. It was the ninth night when it finally broke. I heard his footsteps, slow steps, slower this time. Not the sharp, purposeful stride I'd expected. He stopped at the door, didn't open it, just stood there. I could feel him on the other side, breathing. I slid off the bed, bare feet against cold floor, fingers on the doorknob. I didn't turn. I didn't open it. But I whispered, "If you walk away again, don't come back." Silence, then a breath audible, like something had collapsed inside him. And he walked away anyway. The next morning, I found tea waiting on my windowsill. It wasn't from the housekeeper. She didn't know I took sugar. He did, the 10th night he returned. He didn't touch me immediately. He stood at the bed's foot like he wasn't sure if I'd allow him. He wasn't asking, but he was waiting. I sat up, looked at him, at the shadows under his eyes, at the tension in his shoulders that never seemed to leave. "Why you come?" I asked. He blinked, then softly, "Because you don't stop me." He moved toward me slowly, gently, like I might flee. I didn't. He reached out, brushed my collarbone with his knuckles backs. The contact barely registered, but it sparked something hot and unwanted in my chest. I looked away, but didn't move away. His hand slid beneath my hair, traced the base of my neck, then paused. He said nothing, but his silence wasn't empty this time. It was full of things he couldn't name, and I wasn't ready to hear. He kissed me. Not like the other nights. Not like a man claiming something he purchased. Like someone trying to remember how to ask for something. It shook me not because it was tender, but because I felt myself lean into it. That was the betrayal. Not to my body, but to the part of me that had promised I would not want him. He undressed me like he was unwrapping something fragile. I hated that it made me tremble, not in fear, but longing. His mouth on my collarbone, his hand gripping my thigh, his breath against my ear. This wasn't like before. This was slower and worse because I started to want him. Not for protection. Not from resignation, but for reasons I didn't understand and couldn't forgive. When it ended, he didn't leave. He lay beside me, and I asked not aloud, just to myself, if this was still a prison, why did I feel safest here? He didn't come on the 6th night. The absence hurt more than the act itself ever had. I hadn't expected to miss the sound of his footsteps, the weight of silence breaking just enough to let something human slip through. But when night bled into morning and the door never creaked open, I found myself staring at it like a widow waiting for a husband who was never really hers dotted. Was easier when he was just a stranger who entered without asking. Harder now that I notice when he stayed away. On the 7th night, I left my room. I didn't mean to wander, but the house's stillness pushed me out like a tide. I passed long corridors with wallpaper curling at the edges, bookshelves too neat to be read. A house like this wasn't made for people. It was made for display. A mausoleum with central heating. I paused outside a half-open door, drawn by warm lights flicker his study. I stepped inside. Cashin sat at his desk, back straight, hands still not writing, not moving, just staring at something I couldn't see from where I stood. I should have turned away, but my voice betrayed me. "Who is she?" He didn't flinch, just turned a page in a leather notebook and said, "No one." There was a painting above the fireplace, a woman unfinished, her face a blur, her hair dark and familiar. There was no signature, no frame, just color haunting the wall like memory. Asked again, softer, "Was she your wife?" He stood up. "That room is yours. This one is mine." It wasn't anger in his voice. It was warning. I left before he had to repeat it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat upright in bed, the lamp on, the silence. Thick. My body remembered too much, the way his hand had moved without trembling, the way mine hadn't moved at all. It hadn't been pain that stayed with me. It was how easy it had become to stop resisting. On the 8th night, I waited again. This time, not from fear, but anticipation I couldn't justify. I wore the softest nightgown. I had long sleeves, loose around the wrists, slightly frayed at the collar. Innocent, forgettable. I brushed my hair from habit, not desire. When the door finally opened, it was slower than usual. Cashin stepped in, closing it behind him, but he didn't come to me. He stood by the fireplace for a long time, watching embers he hadn't lit. "I shouldn't be here," he said. "Then, do you want me to leave?" I didn't answer because the silence between us was louder than anything I could say. He crossed the room, sat on the bed's edge, not touching me. I shifted, inching closer. That was the moment, not the kiss, not the heat of his body. The inch, the choice dot, it wasn't surrender. It wasn't rebellion. It was something quieter, something more dangerous. He didn't ask this time, but he waited. He undressed me slowly, like he was afraid the fabric might cut me if he pulled too fast. His hands were colder than the room, but my skin warmed under every touch. And I hated how natural it felt, this trespass dressed in tenderness. He lay beside me, not over me. His mouth found my shoulder, my collarbone, the place beneath my ear that had never been kissed before. My breath caught in my throat, not from fear, from the betrayal of wanting. When he entered me, it wasn't like the first night. There was no urgency, no detachment, no war, just gravity. Slow and suffocating, I let him. And for the first time, I moved with him. Afterward, we didn't speak. He lay on his back, arm resting across his chest, staring at the ceiling like it might break if he blinked. I wanted to ask what he saw. I didn't because I didn't know what I would do with the answer. Instead, I turned toward him, curled beneath the sheet that still smelled like cedar and dust. My voice came out small. "This isn't love." He nodded. "I know." But neither of us moved away. In the morning, I woke before him. He was still asleep, jaw unclenched, one hand lying palm up between. Yes, like something open, like something tired of being closed. I got out of bed quietly, pulled my robe tight, and walked to the windowless corner of the room. There was no view, no sunlight, but I stood there anyway because somehow, in that moment, I needed the absence more than the light. Later that day, I found tea outside my door. It was just how I liked it, milk, no sugar, still warm. There was no note, no tray, just the smallest proof that someone had listened that night. I didn't wait for him, but when he came, I opened the door before he could knock. He didn't touch me that night. He sat in the chair across the room, elbows on knees, head in hands. The fireplace light flickered along his jaw's edges, casting his face in something half shadow, half sorrow. I watched him from the bed, wrapped in the same nightgown he had slid off me the night before. My body still carried the memory of his hands, but something colder pressed against my ribs, now like a truth trying to rise. He hadn't said a word. Neither had I, but silence can rot faster than words. It curdles. It contaminates, especially when it's thick with all the things you won't say. I thought about the painting in his study. The unfinished woman, her blurred face, the way her presence hovered even when we made love, like she was watching, like she was waiting. I hated her, and I didn't even know her name. After a long while, he looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, not from crying, I think, but from holding too much in. "I thought you wouldn't let me in again," he said. It was the first time his voice cracked out, and something in me broke open with it. "I shouldn't have," I whispered. "I still don't know why I did." Cashin didn't answer, but the weight of him filled the room like confession. The next morning, I returned to the study alone. The door wasn't locked. I stood in front of the painting, closer now. The strokes were rough, unfinished. There were outlines for a mouth that was never completed, for eyes that had been painted over and over until no shape remained. He had tried to remember her, or erase her, and failed at both. There was a note on the desk beneath it, scribbled in thick ink, "What you do not grieve will rot inside you." It wasn't signed, but I knew it was his handwriting. When he found me there later, I didn't flinch. "I'm not her," I said. Cashin leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, voice low. I know. Do you? I asked. I stepped toward him one pace, then another. If you touch me while thinking of her, I said, then don't touch me at all. He closed. His eyes, when he opened them, they were softer than I'd ever seen. I haven't touched anyone since her, he said, until you. We didn't sleep together that night. We didn't even share a bed, but I felt closer to him than I had during the nights. His hands were on my skin, because this was the first time he gave me something without taking. Days passed. The house felt different lived in. He started eating. Breakfast again, in silence, but beside me. Sometimes he made the tea. He never touched me unless I invited him to. That, I learned, was the most disarming form of possession, when someone who could take anything from you chooses instead to ask Dot. Then one day, I opened a drawer in the wardrobe and found it. A small leather box. Inside was a thin silver bracelet, delicate, worn, and inside the lid, etched in Cashin's handwriting, a promise I failed to keep. My fingers went cold because I knew, without needing to ask, that it had belonged to her. When I confronted him that evening, I wasn't angry, just hollow. I found the bracelet. He didn't deny it, didn't try to explain. She gave it to me the night before she died, he said quietly. I was supposed to meet her the next morning, but I was late. 10 minutes. He exhaled like the air itself resisted him. She jumped before I arrived. I stared at him, not because of what he said, but because this was the first time I saw shame on his face. Real shame, raw and unshapen. Like he had lived 1,000 days in that one moment and never found the end of it. You can't keep me here to finish what you couldn't fix, I said. I'm not your absolution. He looked at me like a drowning man looks at shore, not with hope, but with disbelief. I know that too, he said. That night, I left my door open, not as an invitation, but as a choice. He came. He stood in the doorway, not crossing the threshold, just watching me, hands by his sides, like he didn't trust them. I don't want to lose you, he said. You don't have me, I replied. Not yet. He nodded, and for the first time, he turned around and left. I closed the door. Then I cried because I knew something had shifted, not in him, but in me. And I wasn't sure I'd ever shift back. It snowed the next morning, not just flakes drifting gently. This was a storm thick and relentless. The kind that buried fences and silenced roads. The kind that made the world disappear 1 inch at a time. I stood in the kitchen, fingers curled around a chipped ceramic mug, watching frost snake along the window. My reflection blurred and reformed with each gust of wind. Behind me, the house was quiet. Cashin hadn't come down yet. Or maybe he had and left before I stirred. We'd learned to orbit each other without touching, without speaking much. A silence that once bruised now rested like breath between words. I'd changed, not him. Appearance. The girl in the mirror still wore linen and braids, still flinched at loud sounds. But something inside had shifted, molted. I no longer felt like a victim trapped in a house. I felt like something else now, something between a woman and a warning. Later. That day, I found Cashin in the conservatory. He was alone, coat half buttoned, watching the snow settle on the glass ceiling. His face was unreadable. A book lay closed on the bench beside him. He didn't speak when I entered, and I didn't offer a greeting. We sat in silence, the way some people sit in pews reverent, unsure of what they're praying to. He broke the stillness. She loves storms, he said quietly. I didn't ask who. He didn't have to clarify. She said the noise gave her permission to be messy, as if the world outside could match the weather inside. I looked at him, not with pity, but with a clarity that surprised even me. You don't owe her your life, I said. His mouth twitched, but it wasn't a smile. I don't, he agreed. But I gave it anyway. That night, I opened my door for him again. Not because I felt sorry, not because I wanted to fix him, but because I'd finally buried the girl I was, the one who flinched, who waited, who only ever did what was asked. She had died in that snowstorm quietly, without ceremony. And I didn't mourn her. I walked barefoot to my bed, sat on its edge, waited. Cashin appeared in the doorway like a man asked to kneel when he'd spent his life standing. He didn't say a word. He just entered. He touched me like a man unlearning violence. Slowly, carefully. His hands didn't press. They listened. His breath matched mine. His eyes, once sharp as flint, softened as they searched my face for something neither of us had named yet. When he kissed me, it wasn't hungry. It was reverent. And when I kissed him back, it wasn't from duty. It was surrender. I guided his hand. Under the hem of my nightgown, I whispered, "This is mine to give." He paused, eyes wide, no longer the man in control, just a man undone by permission. "Then I'll take only what you offer," he said. I placed his hand over my heart. "Then take this first." What happened next was not like the other nights. It wasn't possession. It was communion. The bed creaked beneath our rhythm. The sheets tangled around our legs. His mouth moved across my skin with a kind of ache, like he was mourning every moment he'd ever touched me without care. I clutched his back, pulled him closer, whispered things I didn't know I knew how to say. "You're not hers. You don't have to disappear to be forgiven. You're not a sin." After he didn't leave, he stayed. His arm curled around my waist, my head on his chest. We breathed like a single organism, like two animals who had survived the same storm and found the same cave. I closed my eyes, not from exhaustion, but from relief. In the morning, I woke to find him still there, eyes closed, lips parted, human. I traced the scar beneath his collarbone, a small pale mark shaped like a crescent moon. He stirred but didn't flinch. "I dreamed of fire again," he said. "I know," I whispered. "You always smell of smoke in your sleep." He smiled, the first real one. "I didn't burn this time," he said. I pressed my lips to his throat. "No," I said, "because this time someone stayed." The snow began to melt 3 days later. Thin trickles ran down the gutters, catching the morning sun. I stood by the kitchen sink, rinsing a teacup, and watched the water drip like time, like memory. The air inside the house was warmer now, softer. Something had shifted between us, not loudly, but completely. Cashin still didn't say much, but he looked at me differently. Not with hunger, not with guilt, but with recognition, like I was no longer the girl he bought, like I was someone he had found. We fell into quiet habits. He made coffee too strong. I added sugar when he wasn't looking. He left newspapers on the porch. I clipped out the crossword puzzles. Sometimes we read in the same room and said nothing. And it didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like breath. We hadn't made love again since that night. Not because we were afraid to, but because we didn't need to prove anything anymore. I knew I was wanted. He knew it was forgiven. For now, that was enough. Then my father returned. Didn't knock. Just banged on the iron gate until a groundskeeper called the house. I was in the conservatory when Cashin found me. His jaw was tight, his eyes unreadable. "There's someone at the gate," he said. "You should decide what happens." Next, that was new. He didn't say, "I'll handle it." He said, "You decide." I hadn't seen my father in months. Not since he sold me like a lamb at auction, shaking Cashin's hand without once looking at mine. Now he stood outside in a fraying coat, his eyes bloodshot, his breath visible in the cold. "Let me in, girl," he said. "We need to talk." I didn't move. Cashin stood beside me, quiet, solid. My father glanced at him. "You got what you paid for, didn't you? Now, maybe you can do a little more for your old man." Cashin didn't flinch, but I did. I stepped forward, voice flat. You don't get to call me girl anymore? My father blinked. What's gotten into you? Out, I corrected. What's gotten out of me? He scowled. I raised you. You pawned me. Cashin's hand brushed mine. I didn't look at him, but I felt the way he stood still, letting me speak. Not taking this from me. I needed money, my father said. I made a deal. No, I said. You made a choice. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came. The wind picked up. Loose snow danced between us. For a moment, I saw how small he really was, not just in stature, but in weight. All those years I feared him, and now he looked like a man crushed by his own cowardice. I have nothing left, he mumbled. I thought maybe you... Maybe he... Cashin finally stepped forward and handed him an envelope. There's enough in there to leave, Cashin said, and never come back. My father reached for it. That's generous. Cashin didn't smile. It's not a gift. He left without saying goodbye. And I didn't cry. Not for him. Not for the child I'd been when I still wanted his love. Back inside, I stood by the fireplace, arms wrapped around myself. The silence didn't feel comforting today. It felt full unspoken things hanging between. Just like smoke. Cashin poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed me one, sat down beside me without asking if I wanted to talk. But I did. You didn't owe him anything, I said. I know. And you didn't owe me that choice. He looked at me then, really looked. I didn't know how to give anything before you. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest he'd ever come. He didn't say, I'm sorry. That wasn't his language. He said, you decide. He said, I didn't know how to give. He said, stay. In the way he made room for me at his table, in his house, in his quiet, and sometimes silence is a kind of love. If it listens out later that evening, I found the envelope Cashin had given my father still sitting by the front door unopened, untouched. He hadn't taken the money, just the shame, and gone. Cashin stood by the window in the hall, one hand against the glass, watching the last patches of snow vanish into the earth. I joined him, not speaking, just standing close enough that our arms brushed. He didn't turn to face me, but his hand found mine. And in that quiet gesture, I heard all the words he hadn't said. You are not a commodity. You are not her. You are not alone. There was no ticking clock, no alarms, no calendar marked with red ink. But I felt the date approaching like a slow tide, quiet but inevitable. 12 months since the day I was handed over like a receipt. A year since the night I lay still beneath a man I didn't know. Since then, everything had changed. Not in great cinematic ways, but in the details. The way my name sounded in his voice. The way my body no longer flinched when he reached for me. The way the house now smelled faintly of lavender instead of dust, but something else had changed, too. Something I couldn't touch. I wasn't afraid anymore. And I wasn't his anymore either. Not unless I chose to be. I stood in the garden that morning, boots sinking into thawing soil, watching new buds fight their way through last winter's wreckage. The world was making room for life again. Cashin found me there, hands in his coat. Pockets, collar turned up against the breeze. Spring suits you,